It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you go to, just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Really excited about today's show. We have John Madinger. The latest book he's written is called Lethal Doses, the story behind the Godfather of Fentanyl. And this is this character over here. They just call him Squeak. And he was making LSD for Leary and stuff like that. So we may have some mutual friends here with Mr. Madinger. Okay, John Madinger, are you there?
I am here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you so much. But before we get into the book here, Lethal Doses, the story behind the Godfather of Fentanyl, tell us about yourself. Who is John Madinger?
Well, I'm a retired law enforcement officer. I was in law enforcement for 35 years, most of which was in Hawaii, where I grew up, and then in Oklahoma also. I was working narcotics here in Oklahoma for a couple of years in the 70s, which is where I met Squeak Marquardt.
And so you're in law enforcement in Hawaii?
Yeah, I was with the state of Hawaii in their narcotics enforcement, and also with the U.S. Treasury Department for 22 years, mostly doing money laundering and terrorism financing investigations and some major fraud.
Yeah, when I was looking in your previous books here, because you mentioned to me Going Under, Kidnap, Murder, and the Life Undercover, but when I was looking through all your books, you've written several books about money laundering. Now, who are those books written for law enforcement or for fellows with some extra cash?
Well, there's a funny story about that, actually.
Okay.
No, they're written for law enforcement as a basic guide for criminal investigators to try and educate them on the money laundering laws and ways of investigating the crime. The funny story is I got a call one day from one of the people on the drug task force I worked on. And, they were out on a search warrant, and he called up and said, "Well, we found a copy of your book here at the guy's house where we did the search warrant." And I said, "Well, did I autograph it to him?" Hopefully not. No, apparently I didn't. So.
But clearly he was using it for his own advantages, right? To come up with some tips, right? Not for law enforcement.
Yeah, I tell people that you can't really teach you how to investigate money laundering without teaching you how to be a money launderer.
Right.
So, it has that little drawback.
Yeah, but a lot of my work, too, is finding asset searches and finding secret bank accounts and finding hidden assets and stuff like that. So it's the same thing. Then someone else wants to hide their assets, I can usually advise them on that, too, as well. Okay. So
you probably like the book.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. But Lethal Doses, the story behind the Godfather of Fentanyl. Book just came out. It's not even, the book's ink's still wet. What are we going to find in this book?
Well, this was the story of the guy who first brought fentanyl to the United States, put it out on the street. His name was George Eric Marquardt, and he was self-taught, self-educated, high school. Well, he wasn't a dropout. They kicked him out. They kicked him out for chronic truancy on the same day that he won the Wisconsin State Science Fair. So very intelligent guy, extremely knowledgeable about science, chemistry especially. And he broke bad at an early age, age 12. He was making moonshine in his parents' basement. And he graduated from there to making heroin out of opium and Tylenol with codeine tablets. And he basically made every drug in the book, including, I think you mentioned, LSD for Timothy Leary and the Grateful Dead. Janis Joplin, he made LSD for her. Extremely versatile. At one point, he was making methamphetamine and methamphetamine precursors in Oklahoma. This is when I first met him. And he was also making AZT for AIDS patients that couldn't afford it. So, I mean, he was extremely capable of making just about anything chemical that you could name. And he said that to people. If it's in the book, I can make it. And he eventually graduated through prison contacts to making fentanyl. And he was the first person to get fentanyl out in any quantity on the streets here in the United States. So a really important character, because, we've got this huge fentanyl problem today, and it all basically stems from this one sort of really unusual, really unique character back in the 1990s.
So let me ask you this, because in my experience, a criminal defense investigator, I'm 63 years old. I know I sound a lot younger, but I've been around a long time. I really don't. You hear about a guy, he's a cook. He's a meth cook. He knows how to cook meth. But not that he's also making LSD and also making heroin and also making... so that's very unusual, right?
Well, that's extremely unusual. Most... I work clandestine lab cases. Every other clandestine lab operator that I know of, they picked a drug and they stuck with it once they had it. I mean, they didn't. If they had a market for it, that was the motivation for producing it. Was you have methamphetamine and you can sell that methamphetamine. There's no need to divert into some other unusual or exotic or even, ordinary thing that you haven't got a market for. So, yeah, that was what made him unusual. He wasn't that motivated by the money. He liked the money because it gave him the freedom to do what he wanted to do, which was chemistry. And he was more motivated by the challenge of it. Can I do this? Can I make this substance? Can I modify it so that I can make it easier or faster or more cheaply? And so that was his motivation, and that's what he did with fentanyl. He fooled around with it until he was able to modify the production process or the formula, that he was able to make it cheaper, faster, and more accessible, which is the way that fentanyl is being manufactured today, using that process. So that was his main motivation, was the challenge of it, the chemistry of it. Very, very unusual in a clandestine chemist. I mean, I've never heard of another one that was doing that.
Yeah, usually these guys, they have like a mentor, who gave my handwritten instructions how to make their meth, and they made a fortune doing it. But that's how they hand it down, from one guy to another guy. Winds up in prison, he hands it to another guy.
Right. It's a recipe. They're recipe followers, a lot of them. And they want the easiest process possible, right, that yields the most product. And once they've got that, like Walter White, I mean, he, on Breaking Bad, fictional clandestine chemist, but, he wasn't out there going, well, today I'm going to make methamphetamine, but tomorrow I'm going to make heroin.
Right.
That wasn't his thing. He was doing what produced the best result for him. And that's the way most clandestine chemists are, that especially today with fentanyl, most of that chemistry is taking place in Mexico or China, and that's the process they're using, and they use the precursor chemicals that they need to make it, and that's that's the only thing they need to do. That wasn't Squeak, though. He was a character.
So today, like you said, I was just in Arizona recently, and there's a lot of fentanyl coming over the border down there. But people, when they picture in their mind how this stuff is manufactured in these labs, these clandestine labs, they think of Walter White with a Winnebago, like a motorhome. But is that really how it is? Because when you saw, we saw when Trump was president, they bombed a heroin factory in Afghanistan. And that thing was huge. It was like the size of a Costco or a Walmart. This was a huge facility. So what are we seeing on the other end of the border? These can't be little ramshackle apartment labs, right?
No, you've got. It's going to be kind of dependent on your volume of production. If you're in a place where you have access to all the chemicals and precursors and equipment and stuff that you need, you can set up a pretty big facility and crank out quite a bit of stuff. Squeak wasn't doing that. He had a lab in a 600 square foot house in Wichita, Kansas, and then a little later he moved to a production to a larger place in an industrial park. But it wasn't huge amounts that he was cranking out. He was putting out generating maybe a couple of pounds. Well, a couple of pounds of fentanyl goes a long way. A couple of pounds of pure fentanyl goes a long way. And today, of course, you're talking multiple 100 pounds of fentanyl. Some of these labs can produce large amounts of fentanyl, and it would be a large facility. Not in the United States, though, so it's a little more difficult for American law enforcement to get access to that.
And where is George Markwood today? Is he in prison? Is he dead?
Yeah, he died in 2017. He passed away now from cancer, undoubtedly caused by exposure to all the chemicals that he handled over the years. And I'm sure that's what the reason was for his death.
And you mentioned that he wasn't motivated by money, but was he making money? Was he a wealthy man?
Oh yeah, he was he made enough money to get the things that he wanted, which was mostly laboratory equipment. He was mostly involved with buying more laboratory equipment that he didn't need. I mean, he didn't need it to make the fentanyl, but he liked to have it to make the fentanyl, and so he invested a lot of money in that, most of which wasn't found, by the way. That's one of the mysteries of the case, is that he had a secret lab where he stashed all of his stuff, anticipating that when he got arrested in connection with the fentanyl operation back in '93, that he would get out of prison at some point and be able to go to his secret lab and start back over again. So they never were able to really seize much in terms of assets or proceeds from his operation. So they think most of it is still out there someplace.
Did he have like front businesses, front companies?
He created a business called Prairie Lab, and that was his front. It was supposed to be doing equipment and laboratory equipment repair and analytical work for the oil business in southern Kansas, in a little town called Goddard, which is just outside of Wichita. And that was his front for the fentanyl operation.
Well, then, which is pretty smart, lab equipment repair, gives an excuse for having all this equipment, right? But after his first few arrests, wasn't he prohibited from going back into that business or getting those kind of licenses and things?
Well, he didn't need any licenses. He was arrested numerous times before he really turned full time to drug manufacturing in the 1970s. He was arrested multiple times for equipment theft. He was stealing equipment from universities. He estimated he stole about $2 million worth of electronic equipment and laboratory equipment from different universities and other institutions. And he got busted numerous times, did 1 or 2 year sentences for most of that in multiple states. While he was incarcerated in at least 2 of those states, and probably 3, he set up drug manufacturing laboratories in prison.
Really?
So, oh yeah, he was capable of making drugs from almost anything. There was an agent up on when we were chasing him up on the West Coast who said, this guy can make drugs out of the dirt in your pocket. And he and I laughed about that when I was talking to him later. And he said, well, maybe not that, but we used to have conversations about how quickly could you make methamphetamine out of if all I gave you was the key to a Home Depot, or if I gave you a key to a gas station, how long would it take you to get to methamphetamine? And he, every single time, he came up with a number, and it was kind of a scary number, actually. It wouldn't have taken him too long. And that would have been the kind of chemistry that he would have loved. That would have been the challenge that he would have loved, was if I give you a gallon can of gasoline and a bucket of water and
Drano.
CO2, can you make it? Yeah. Can you make methamphetamine? Well, yeah, eventually he would have been able to do it.
Now, was he a drug user himself? Was he marijuana,
No, he was mostly take the if he made something unusual or whatever, LSD, mescaline, he had a drug. He got a drug called 2,4,5-trimethoxymethamphetamine, and that one was he took that one. He would take those just to make sure that it would work the way it was advertised, right, or to see what the results were, so that he wouldn't necessarily be poisoning his customers. Now, he didn't do that with fentanyl. He didn't take fentanyl on purpose. He did get high one time from the manufacturing process and passed out on the floor and woke up, and he said, I was lucky to be alive. But no, he wasn't a regular drug user. Didn't like the idea of the concept that his head would be messed up.
What a fascinating guy, Now,
he was a unique guy. Unique.
Now, did he have workers working for him in the lab, or was it like a one-man show?
It was pretty much a one-man show, and when we talked about the fentanyl, he would use other people to do housekeeping chores and stuff like that. He had people that he would use for minor jobs, but they weren't really doing the chemistry with him. His partner in crime for the fentanyl operation, Joe Madinger, he helped him out in the lab a couple of times, and that was kind of the extent of it. When he was doing meth in Oklahoma before, he had a couple people working for him, and they did help him with the chemistry. I spoke with them and interviewed them and got their side of the story.
And what about when he would get busted, or when he died? Did his labs go on? Would his operation continue beyond him?
No. If he got busted, this was another unique thing about him, was that when he got busted, he immediately pled guilty and gave it all up. The game was over, and he actually said that to the arresting officers and say, well, you got me fair and square, and here's what you need to know about my deal. And he would then brag about everything he'd done, and very, very proud of what he'd done, and he'd give it all up. And he probably didn't give it all up, but he gave most of it up. And that was consistently his approach toward the criminal justice system was, we play the game, and when the game is over and I have to go, then the next part of it is I spend a lot of time in prison. When I get out, we start playing the game again. And that was his approach to every time he got arrested. It was that way. He never went to trial. A lot of times he wouldn't even accept a court-appointed attorney. He just pled guilty. He tried to plead guilty on the first day after the fentanyl bust in 1993, and the judge, obviously wouldn't let him because it's just an arraignment, right? And nobody pleads guilty at arraignment, but he did. In fact, he said, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty? And he said guilty, and the judge said, well, you can't plead guilty now. This is just for arraignment purposes, get you a lawyer and everything. His response to the judge, well, why did you ask me then? Which cracked everybody up in court.
And did he, if he's pleading guilty, did he get the full charges, the maximum?
Yep. He always pled straight up. He would cooperate with us because He cooperated with DEA, testified against a co-conspirator, but he did not ask for any consideration. And that came from his personal philosophy, which I don't know if you're, familiar with the concept of outlawry, but in old England and even in the United States, after when we were a colony and even after that, the government could declare you an outlaw after you missed court appearances or whatever. And once you were declared an outlaw, you no longer had any rights, including to your life. Anybody could kill you for any reason, and they would face no consequences because an outlaw you lived outside the law. And that was he believed in that. He said, I have no rights that the government is obligated to, respect for me. I don't have a right to an attorney. I don't have a right to remain silent. I don't have a right to a trial by jury. I'm an outlaw. And that was his attitude. And the judge told him in 93, he goes, you can't plead guilty. It's a potential death penalty case. People died because of this. And he says, well, that's the choice I made. I knew what the risks were when I went in, and I accept responsibility.
Have you ever met any other
actions.
Defendant who had the same philosophy?
No.
Yeah, not even close.
No.
Right?
I've never even heard of anybody that has met anybody like that. I mean, that's not what people do. He went to court in 78 when we got him in Oklahoma for cooking meth. He went to court, and before he's sentenced, he told the judge, I'm a drug manufacturer. I've always been a drug manufacturer. If I didn't believe in drug manufacturing, I wouldn't have done it. And when I get out, I'm going to do it again. And the judge couldn't believe it. The judge was sitting there like, nobody does this before sentencing. And the judge said, well, it's going to be a while before you do it again. It's going to be 10 years. So, but that's the kind of guy he was. He was like that. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I ask no consideration from the court. And the judge is like, okay, well, you're going to get no consideration.
Now, did he have other unusual beliefs? Or was he a married man? Did he have a family? Did he have a faith, a religious faith? Did he have other unusual beliefs?
Well, he was an atheist, but he was married 3 times. 2 of them, I think this does reflect on his personality or his character because you've heard the expression, he's doing the right thing by the woman. Yeah. Because he got her pregnant, and that's what you did. You married him. So, that was his philosophy was, I accepted the responsibility that I might be making a kid, and now I've got to be a father. And so he did have that attitude toward
right and wrong. He had some kind of self-respect and some dignity, and that's how it was back in those days. Anyway, back in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, you got a woman pregnant, you married her. Right,
and he had a moral compass. One of the other agents said he had a moral compass. It just didn't point north. And I said, that he did. Had a moral philosophy toward life. He said, I asked him, when we first met, I go, how do you justify yourself? You're doing something that's really harmful to people and kills people and injures their family and society. And he goes, they pay their nickel and they take their chances just like I do. So I know the risks when I go into clandestine lab. I can blow myself up, or I can get burned up, or busted, or all kinds of bad things can happen to me. But that's my choice. I made that choice. I'm responsible for my decision. And everybody that takes drugs should be responsible for their decision. And if bad things happen, it's not on me. It's on them. They knew the risk going in. And I go, that's a pretty cold-blooded philosophy, toward the people you killed. And his fentanyl killed a lot of people. The official number is 126, but they weren't looking for fentanyl back then, medical examiners, and they missed a lot of it. And I'm sure it's well over 1,000 people.
And just think, too, of all the people, methamphetamine psychosis, or their lives ruined, the murders they committed while under methamphetamine, the chain going on could go on forever. We're talking to John Madinger, johnmadinger.com. The book we're talking about is called Lethal Doses, the story behind the Godfather of Fentanyl, and that's a fella named George Eric Marquardt. They called him Squeak. So now how does John Madinger, you're a cop, right, in Hawaii, of all places, and how do you come into contact? How do you run cross paths with this Mr. Marquardt?
Well, like I said, I was at the time I was working as a narcotics agent in Oklahoma,
Gotcha.
And we had this undercover project that we were going to work on. He was an informant. He'd been arrested for stealing equipment from Oklahoma State University, and he was currently on parole, then on parole from Michigan for doing the same thing, and he had a previous conviction in Oklahoma for doing the same thing. So this time he was probably looking at 10 years. And he approached the case agent for the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and said, I can give you some help with this guy. And he's running a methamphetamine lab. And he did provide some information about this other guy. And turned out that this individual, Robert Harris, had ripped him off. They'd been in a meth lab together, and Eric was doing all of the chemistry, and Harris was doing all of the money, providing the money and doing the sales, selling the meth. And Eric came home one day, and all the stuff was gone. The guy had ripped him off, so he was a little annoyed about that, and he justified talking to the cops, on the basis that this guy had ripped him off and didn't deserve any consideration from him. So he spilled all the secrets that he needed to, and we were able to bust Harris. Actually, busted Harris in two different labs. So it worked out pretty good from that perspective. But that's how I met him, was as he was an informant, and I was one of the agents in the Bureau's Oklahoma City office.
So he presents himself to the narcotics investigators, detectives. And I want to be an informant. I want to give some dirt on my enemies. But he goes in and does that without an attorney, without any kind of immunity deal or anything?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't think he had an attorney in '78 when we busted him for the lab that he was in Beggs, Oklahoma, out south of Tulsa. I'm almost sure he didn't have an attorney, because that he pled guilty straight up and went straight to jail. That was his approach toward the system. It's a game, and we're all players in the game. And when it's over, for me, it's over. And I'll be back out in 5 or 6 years, and we can start playing again.
Do you think maybe he was thinking in the back of his mind, if I give John Madinger and his buddies this information, they'll look the other way with Marquardt?
Oh, but he definitely took advantage of it, because he was in a position where he would meet almost all. It was a small agency back then. There were only about 18 of us, and the whole state, and he met most of us. So he was definitely taking notes on how we operated, and he would adjust his operations accordingly. I mean, information, you try to keep information away from a guy like that. Like, for instance, our plan was we were going to set up a storefront in Norman, Oklahoma, and sell laboratory supplies and chemicals to potential lab operators, and then follow those things back to the lab and bust them. And that was the plan. And he figured that out. I was told I was going to be undercover, and I was told by the case agent, don't let him know what we're doing here. Don't tell him what we're doing, because we don't want him knowing too much about it. But he figured that out in 10 minutes on his own. He goes, "You're setting up a trick store." And yeah, kind of. So, very smart guy, and he knew better. I mean, his contacts with us made him a better criminal because he was taking careful notes. Smart guy.
Because there are people that are career criminals who establish relationships with the FBI or the DEA as informants, and then there's a lot of looking the other way going on, correct?
It happens, yeah. It didn't happen in his case because, everybody in the Bureau knew that he was, wherever he was in a lab somewhere. Whatever he was doing, he was in a lab. He wasn't going to quit. So, we were always looking for him when he wasn't around and trying to nail down where he was and what he was doing. But, and he never cooperated past, like before he got busted. He never did that. Never tried to keep the law enforcement at arm's length before he got busted. But after he got busted, he was, fully cooperative. But I'll testify. What do you want me to say? So, and he didn't expect anything in return. It was like, you want to give me some time off, that's fine. If not, no, that's fine too.
Did he have mentors like in organized crime, seniors he could go to give him advice on how to deal with these kind of things and how to do these things?
He did not really have that kind of relationship. He was very friendly with, when he was transferred to Lewisburg, after our bust in 1978, he was sent to Leavenworth first, and then he was transferred to Lewisburg after about, I don't know, a year or two. In Lewisburg's the home of they call it the Mafia's home prison, East Coast Mafia's home prison. All of the big Mafia guys, East Coast mobsters, they all go to Lewisburg. And he was in there with some pretty heavy hitters from the New York families and Philadelphia. His best friend in Lewisburg was Philip Rastelli, Rusty Rastelli. He was at the time he was the boss of the Godfather of the Bonanno family.
Yeah,
and there was another guy there named Louis Cirillo, who was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, heroin trafficker in the United States, and one of the two founders of the French Connection. So he was like a major player, and it was actually Louis Cirillo, that called his attention to fentanyl and said, "Hey, is this possible? Is this possible to make this?" And I think he saw the potential there for replacing the entire American heroin supply with fentanyl, which is something that has now come to pass, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now,
as far as a mentor, I mean, he considered Rastelli a mentor, but they were really didn't have the kind of relationship where Rastelli telling Squeak what to do or how to do it. That wasn't the relationship, really.
Now, when I was doing some research on this before the interview, am I correct that there's a film or a movie about this coming out?
Yeah, it's called The Godfather of Fentanyl, and it's been released now on Fox Nation. It's a 4-part docuseries. The first 3 episodes have already been aired, and then they're streaming now on Fox. And the last episode is scheduled for next week, Wednesday. So, The Godfather of Fentanyl. It's a really good recounting of his life. I helped them and cooperated. It's actually based on the book. So, it's a good recounting of his life and experience and the first fentanyl epidemic in the 90s.
Right. So now, I lived in New York in the 90s, and I kind of recall this. I think when he was making the fentanyl, and then they were inserting it or mixing it with the heroin, and it was causing overdoses?
That did occur, yes. The first outbreak of fentanyl was in the first weekend of February 1991, and it just hit the street like a bomb. Right. It was poorly mixed, and it was pure fentanyl mixed with, one of those cutting agents. Mannitol, I think, was the cutting agent they used, and they didn't have the balance down. They didn't know the exact proportion of how much would get people high, how much would kill people. They didn't have that kind of experience. And of course, Mark was 1,500 miles away. He was in Wichita, Kansas. It went back to the East Coast with his partner, and they hooked up with some Bronx heroin merchants and put it out on the street as Tango and Cash, packets of Tango and Cash, and 13 people killed in the first weekend. It was pretty deadly. I think they figured 27 or 30 people over the next week or so, and it was enough to make them shut down because the heat was so high. They had trucks circulating in the neighborhood saying, toxic heroin's been sold in New York. Tango and Cash, don't buy it, don't take it. Well, you know how junkies are. When they hear that, they want the best stuff possible, and that's not going to happen to me. And they go out and get more, and it just caused more overdoses, more deaths. It was really a disaster. But it was the first time that fentanyl had really been on the street. Nobody was ready for it. Nobody was prepared for that kind of impact.
But then it kind of dwindled away, right, until our current epidemic, right?
It did, and the reason for that is that when DEA got Marquardt in February of '93, so exactly 2 years later, when they busted him, that was the only lab in the United States, and fentanyl stopped. Period. There was no more fentanyl on the street. If you look at the statistics, you see that overdose deaths from fentanyl were pretty high in '91, really high in '92, and then they dropped back down in '93 because he got busted pretty early in '93, and that was the end of it. And then you don't see any more fentanyl deaths. You see a few. Most of those were like pharmaceutical fentanyl that was diverted. And you don't see any more until 2005. And in 2005, DEA identified a lab in Toluca, Mexico, and they were manufacturing fentanyl, and they busted that lab, I think, in 2006. And once that happened, it stopped again. So it didn't really kick up again until 2014, 2015 time period. And then, of course, it's just been all over. It's just exploded.
The entire cities of people walking around like zombies, And my understanding is now it's manufactured in China but brought up through Mexico?
Some of it's manufactured in China. It's illegal in China, but I'm not sure how forceful they are about enforcing that law. Most of it is precursors are made in China. The chemicals that you need to make fentanyl are made in China and shipped in bulk to Mexico, and then they're processed in labs in Mexico. Cartels have control over those, and they process the stuff and bring it into the United States across the border as fentanyl in either pill form or powder form.
So I'm looking at the description of the book here, and at one point you mentioned that he was making nerve gas for Idaho Nazis.
He did do that, yeah.
Well, then let me ask you a question. 1 minute you're dealing with these Bronx, these guys in the Bronx, and the next day you're dealing with Idaho Nazis. He could just move in those circles seamlessly?
Well, it wasn't all. It was more sequential. He was. That was a time when he was up on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, and he was making mostly hallucinogens at the time. Not a lot of market for it, but I don't know how he crossed into the Idaho Nazi thing, but I guess there's some up there in the Idaho Panhandle or somewhere that wanted nerve gas. Didn't want it for any good reason. I don't think there's any good reason for nerve gas, but yeah, he was not shy about saying that if you give me enough money, I'll make whatever you want, and he would have seen that as a challenge and done it.
Did he actually manufacture the nerve gas?
Well, he manufactured the components. Yeah, he manufactured this binary weapon, so the stuff doesn't become lethal until you mix the two chemicals together. And it's a binary device, and so he manufactured those the two chemicals, and then he said they had some kind of a looked like a sprinkler system set up, and they could mix the chemicals, or hit a button and mix the chemicals and spray. If they were raided by the cops, or if there was any kind of need for it, I guess they could mix the chemicals and put it out through the sprinkler system and kill everybody in their place. So,
how much can they pay you to make nerve gas? I mean,
I never asked them that. That's a good question.
Like, I would be terrified to be dealing with that nerve gas. You know what I mean? And how much could they pay you? I mean, what's your life worth?
I don't know.
Did he get convicted for the nerve gas plot?
No.
Then how'd you hear about it?
No, he told me. He told me about it. And it was a subject. Actually, I'd read this in an intelligence. He told another cop this earlier. Excuse me. He had told another cop this, and it came out as an intelligence bulletin. This is what you need to look for if you go into a house and you see a sprinkler system that doesn't look right. Be careful, because that may be a gas hazard. And I asked him about that later, because I'd read the intelligence bulletin, and he said, yeah, it was the Idaho Nazis. Yeah. And you run in some strange circles, boy.
But now, did he have any shame, for admitting to you? Like, what was his demeanor like? Because you had this conversation with him yourself, right?
Yeah.
So then what was his demeanor? He's talking about making nerve gas.
Well, it was the same attitude that he had toward I think anything else, toward fentanyl or anything else. It's the moral neutrality of science. We had this discussion a bunch of times, and he was a big admirer of the German chemists pre-World War II, pre-World War I too, that had the attitude that it's just the science. It's just about the chemistry. It's not about morality. What the people do with the chemicals may be immoral or wrong, but the science itself is morally neutral. And the example that we both liked was, well, there are two of them really. One of them was the Haber-Bosch process for manufacturing nitrogen, pulling nitrogen out of the atmosphere, out of the air. It's used for, you can use that to make fertilizer. You can make unlimited quantities of fertilizer out of this, so that literally half the population on Earth today relies on that source of fertilizer for the food base. So enormously beneficial for that process that was developed by Fritz Haber and Bosch. But the flip side of that is that the same process can be used to make nitrogen-based products like ammonia, to make explosives. So countries that didn't have the means to manufacture explosives before, now they can use that process and it came in real handy for Germany in World War I. It was feel helpful. And it was the science itself is morally neutral, and he believed in that. He thought that was the correct interpretation of that philosophy, which is that, hey, science doesn't care what you do. It is bound by the laws of nature and not the laws of man, and there's no moral judgment to be made for it. And the other example is Niemann, who was the developer. He was the first person to get cocaine out of the coca leaf, and he also produced another substance that had no medical or industrial use at all, bis 2-chloroethyl sulfide, which was known as sulfur mustard, and that probably killed Niemann. It had really bad effects, but that substance was later used as mustard gas, basically, right. and so it was used as a chemical weapon. That same substance was later discovered to have really beneficial uses as a anti-cancer drug, very valuable in anti-cancer drug. It's still used today as a treatment for lymphoma and some other cancers. So it's saved a lot of people. That same substance that was a chemical weapon saves cancer victims from, it puts cancer victims in remission. So, is there a moral judgment to be made on that chemical? It's the uses to which the chemicals put, I think, that's more valid question about. And that was his attitude, was I make it. What people do with it is up to them. If they're bad people, then they're going to do bad things with it. If they're good people, they'll do good things with it, and not up to me to make that judgment.
Now, you see, if I had him in front of me right now, I would ask him, well, then what about those Nazi experiments with the twins? Where they, would you justify that? Well, what do you think he would have said to that question?
He did not like the Nazis.
Okay.
He was associated with,
they probably undercharged him on the nerve gas. So he had to pay for that.
Yeah. No, he didn't. Well, he definitely didn't like Hitler and the Nazi guys, because they were, he thought that they were, he thought that whole philosophy was wrong, and they did a lot of bad stuff. I don't think he would have approved those scientific experiments. I never asked him about it, but I don't think he would have approved of that. He would have had no problem at all. Well, you bring up that question. That's a good question, because I'm pretty sure Fritz Haber, he developed the process we were just talking about. After World War I, he developed an insecticide for the pesticide that killed rats and other pests and insects, and that was he called that Zyklon A,
right?
And a very, very, very beneficial. Very valuable. Saved a lot of people. Kept people from starving because it killed pests, and getting diseases because it killed pests, and so it's a very beneficial chemical. But what the SS did with it, they converted it to Zyklon B, and that's the gas that was used at Auschwitz. So, I see where he was coming from with the moral neutrality issue. I don't think he would have approved. I didn't ask him about this, but I don't think he would have approved of the way that the SS used that chemical, but to kill people. And he never himself set out to kill somebody. Said, "Oh, I'm going to make this to kill someone."
Except the nerve gas.
Unlike Walter White. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess.
Yeah. No. What was he, a likable guy? Did you get along with him?
I haven't talked to anybody that didn't like him on some level.
Wow.
And it's really hard to you've got to, everybody says the same thing. You know, the guy's really a likable, personable guy. The U.S. attorney that prosecuted him said that. The agents that busted him said that, and his associates all say that too. And you got to sort of like qualify that by saying, yeah, but he kills people and he doesn't mind. So, you know, that's kind of a factor, you know, in your thinking. It's got to be a factor in your thinking, right? No. But yeah, I liked him. I thought he was he's an interesting person to talk to. I was always, I was always interested in his, his attitude, because it was so unusual in a criminal, you know.
Yeah.
Criminals just don't have that. And he liked us too. It was like, we're players on the other team, but I can't play the game unless you do. So, and you know, we're both there. We both play this. He liked the people we dealt with. When we busted him in '78, the agents went up to his door. He already knew both of the agents that went to the door from his prior dealings with OBN, and he said they knocked, and he came to the door, and he said, "Is that you, Mel?" And the other guy says, "Yeah, I got a warrant." And they pulled him outside, and he stepped back into the doorway and wouldn't let him go inside. Well, ordinarily that's like, you know, that's a big no-no, right? Interfering with but he has said he had noticed that the masks they were wearing had the wrong filter. You know, those masks, the face masks that you have, the respirators.
Yeah, the 95, RN 95.
Yeah. These are the ones that got the big glass face plate, and they've got these on the side. They've got these canisters that have cartridges in them that are color coded, and they're different colors depending on the type of hazard that you're dealing with. And he noticed immediately that they didn't have the right cartridges in the masks. Now, he could have said, "Go right on in, boys.
Mm-hmm.
You know, help yourself. There's cyanide gas in there." And he knew that they were wearing the wrong mask, and that would be the end of them. But he said, "No, you can't go in there because there's cyanide gas. Take my mask. I'll tell you where I have all my cartridges. You can go in and get the right ones and come back out again and swap out." And, you know, I don't know too many crooks that would have done that. You know, that was an unusual behavior for criminals. A
career criminal,
yeah.
And on that note,
you're going to put me in prison?
Yeah, on that note, we are out of time, though. John Madinger, in fact, we went over time. This is such a fascinating story. I didn't get a chance to ask you about going under, kidnapping, murder, and a life undercover. Hopefully, I can have you come back and tell us that story. Great storyteller. Listen to John Madinger, incredible storyteller. And this book here, Lethal Doses, the story behind the Godfather of Fentanyl, 5 stars on Amazon. You can tell the guys what a storyteller here he is on the phone. You can imagine the book. And plus, keep an eye out, too, for that Fox streaming series about the Godfather of Fentanyl. John Madinger, thank you so much, man.
Well, you're very welcome.
Good night.
Glad to be here.